start, for people to start rolling in, because it's 8:30. Um, but people are starting to come in pretty quickly.
I see.
Um, yeah. And again, I just want to remind everyone, some of you I know, Glenn and Melvin have met me. I am not Ramon Gill. I am Greg Silber. I publish as Gregory Paul Silber. It's like Silver, but with a B instead of a V. So if you need to address me, you could call me Greg. I Ramon was not able to make it tonight, so he asked me to fill in for him. So I have all the questions that Ramon prepared. I credit where it's due. And we'll start in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
I like your background, Melvin. All right. Let's give it another minute. And on behalf of Ramon, Bill, thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh yeah, no, it's my pleasure. It's yeah, it's good to not just be talking to myself or my kids all the time.
How did you get connected with Ramon?
Well, what was that? 2023, he was at SBX where briefly met. And then I think ALA was when we actually started chatting last year, maybe. I saw him a couple times last year, so it's kind of hard to remember. But I think it was like ALA we started chatting, but there might have been a con before that. Um, because yeah, I feel like we've talked a few times, but then again, ALA is kind of like intensive, so maybe we just talked a couple of times at ALA. I'm having a tough time. Last year, I basically traveled the earth, so it was yeah, a lot of people. It was kind of overload, but I enjoyed it. But
Yeah, but I know people who go to a lot of conventions and stuff. It could be pretty overwhelming.
well, I mean, I don't really mind that. It was just I just yeah, it was just I like being places, but I kind of at the point in my life where I don't really like traveling to and from places.
I see.
So like if there was a teleportation machine, I would definitely sign up for it, because yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
now just because like we have planes falling out of the sky, now I'm sort of like, yeah, I don't know if I really want to go anywhere. Like,
well, I've always said, whenever the question of like what superpower would you want to have, like for me, it's always teleportation. Like, if only because like it would just save me so much time and effort.
yeah, I mean, for a while there, like the whole idea of like the self-driving car for when I have to drive to like Chicago would be like perfect, right? Because I
Yeah.
could just like hop in the back seat, like sleep for like 10 hours and then 2 more hours I'd be there. Like that just kind of sounds a little perfect, but obviously we're pretty far away from that.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing everybody it would have to be a system where every car was driveless or driverless. So
Yeah, well, right now, I don't think we're at we the place we need to be able to trust something like that.
As I said, like suddenly I don't feel like flying. Like
Yeah,
like we hadn't had like crash in like 16 years, and all of a sudden we have like seven in like 3 weeks or something. Like yeah,
it's insane.
yeah,
But I think we get started with the questions now.
yeah. Hit me.
Okay, cool. So
Oh
once
wait,
again,
how long is this anyway?
what?
How long is this?
Oh, an hour. So we'll be
Okay,
ending at 9:30, and we're leaving some time for questions from the audience.
okay, no
Um,
worries.
But once again, for anyone who didn't hear me say before, I am not Ramon Gill. My name is Gregory Paul Silber. You could call me Greg. It's like Silver, but with a B instead of a V. I am a writer and editor. But I am currently in grad school, trying to become a high school English teacher, but I'll always be a writer though. That's never gonna change. Just my day job is no longer as a copywriter, ever since AI kind of took over that whole world. Anyway, I'm here with Bill Campbell, who is going to be telling us a little bit about his journey as a creator and writer. Um, I'll just get started with the first question, Bill. Please tell us a bit about yourself. What first got you into graphic novels?
um, well, as well, for those of you who don't know, I'm also a publisher, so we run.
Yes, I meant to say that, publisher.
Yeah, so I head up Rosarium Publishing. We do comics and science fiction, focus mainly on brown folks, and we publish folks from all around the world. So just to get that out of the way. um, uh, what got me into graphic novels? That's actually, I mean, when I was a kid, I was deeply into comic books. Um, I mean, I read a lot, but comic books was like one of my comic books and music were like my two big addictions from like the time I was like 9 or 10 or so. And comics kind of ended when I got my driver's license. Uh, because it was like, do I drive or do I, read comics and, the pursuit of love, let's say, was like the driving force. So I was like, I didn't even pay attention to comics. And then, in all honesty, um, because I'm primarily or was primarily a science fiction writer, I didn't really start paying attention to comics again until I became a publisher. Um, yeah, like I'm basically like a lit guy and nonfiction person. But for my third novel, I guess we'll go back. Basically, while I was writing, I was self-publishing, and even though I had a fancy schmancy New York agent, I was still self-publishing. And during the rounds of my third novel, called Coontown Killing Caper, I did a few comic book conventions, and and I just kept running into like incredibly talented people who weren't being published. Um, and then the other thing that kind of happened, this is all sort of like this weird kind of convergence, right? So I was self-publishing and I self-published three novels, and two out of those three novels ended up in academia. So my
Oh,
first
wow.
so my first novel, Sunshine Patriots, guy was writing his PhD dissertation called Science Fictional Reactions to War, and he included my book. So it was like me with Heinlein, Haldeman, Le Guin, and my segment was the science fiction's reactions to the what was it, the second Iraq War. And the funny thing was that I'd written it yeah, about 6 years. Let's see. I wrote that in 98. So yeah, so I wrote it like 4 years before the whole war on terror actually happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. So and then my third novel, which was Coontown Killing Caper, even though I was nobody and self-publishing is being taught in like 3 or 4 universities the year it came out. So I was thinking like, well, everybody likes to think that they're special, but I was like, well, I'm not that special. I can't be like the only author who's good enough for academia, but not good enough for a publisher. And then when I was doing these different comic conventions, I would meet people. I was just like, oh, um, yeah, like that's how John Jennings and I met. We met at OnyxCon in Atlanta. Um, so it was like that, and not seeing a lot of brown folks being published in science fiction and stuff, but seeing like that there were tons from around the world who were writing it. And there was just a certain point where I was just like, somebody's got to do something about this. And then I always think that if that statement comes out of your mouth, you're probably the person who needs to do something about it.
Yeah.
And I heeded the call. So that was basically how I started getting back into comics, was just meeting people like Jennings and all that stuff. And I just kind of saw the potential for, marginalized voices. Like it kind of works in the same space as speculative fiction. Like you can talk about whatever you want and pursue anything that you want in comics. And I really like that possibility.
Totally. Well, was the goal always to be a publisher? What were like your career steps?
Okay, so
At
this is
that point?
funny. Okay, so this is actually pretty funny. So my shtick used to be that I never wanted to be a publisher. Like it was never like on my list. But remember when the first Wonder Woman came out?
Yeah, yeah.
So
2017, right? Yeah.
yeah, that sounds about right. So um it was weird. I was driving back home. I'm in DC, so I was driving back home from TCAP. So it's like 1, 2, 3 in the morning, right? And back when I was on Twitter, I was getting like all these Twitter notifications while I was driving, and this is just weird. So when I finally get home, I'm like looking, and people are like, "Bill, is that you? Bill, my guy, what is this, Bill?" And so this woman who was inspired by Wonder Woman being released went through her old comics and started reading the George Perez run from back in, was it 86, 87. And yeah, when I was 16, I wrote a letter to Wonder Woman where I was like, one of the big problems in comics is that a lot of people, a lot of the writers are writing about cultures that they're not from. And then I was like, and so they have these little things like a French person will say n'est-ce pas every once in a while, or somebody will say que pasa, like something like that. But you never ever got the sense that these characters were from the cultures that they were from. And here I am sitting there, little, maybe one day y'all will like incorporate writers and artists who are actually from these cultures to be writing your comics, right? And this is like 86, so I'm like 16. And here I was like, what, 30 years later, like this old letter to the editor that I wrote, and that's in Wonder Woman #4 or something, I don't even know. Like, and apparently I was telling Karen Berger how to do her job. um, and and I was just like, oh wow, like when I was 16, like that was literally the blueprint of Rosarium.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
it was bizarre. I was sitting there going like, whoa, because I'd even forgotten that I'd written it, and I'm like, damn, okay, like, yeah, that's my first published piece.
Well, let's back up a bit. Could you describe for people who don't know what the primary responsibility of the publisher is?
Um, what do you mean? So, like, I don't know. Like, to
Well,
publish?
in your own words, like what does a publisher do?
Well, I mean, do you want the okay, so in general, it's to publish a book, right? For us, even though we're small, we're internationally distributed, and stuff like that. So basically, you're looking at, um, if something's accepted, we sign a contract for X amount of years. There's like a little advance that will not make you rich, at all, in the least. Um, and then generally it's about an 18-month process from like acceptance to being published. And then basically, as I said, we're internationally distributed. So, basically say like 4 months, because the time keeps expanding now. 4 months before, we're trying to get as much press as possible. Um, you print the book, it goes through all these different, distribution channels. You're doing a lot of business to business stuff, like telling different stores and libraries, like, hey, this book is coming out. It's like stuff that people don't see. Um, but usually, like things don't magically appear anywhere. Um, and then yeah, you just just hired a publicist on the comic side, so trying to get like interviews and stuff like that. Um, and then hopefully the artist and the publisher can work together to try to get the thing out to as many people as possible. Um, we kind of we're we have like Hollywood representation as a publisher, so if people want to be a part of that too, like that's another thing that we do. But that's if you want to. That's not like any kind of, you know, hey, sign over your life. Like we don't do that. We're just like,
Right.
hey, if you want to do this. However, if you want to if you want studios to pick it up, like it's a fight to not sign over your life.
Yeah,
Like Disney would literally take like your children. like they would. Like and have no problem with it. They would just do it. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's it in a nutshell. I'm on the streets a lot. Um, like last year I did a bunch of conventions, but a lot of times I do a lot of stuff. Like I'm just out selling the book a lot. Um, whatever that book is. Um, because I
So
like it.
so it sounds like you're the person kind of just overseeing things from soup to nuts when it comes to
Well, I mean, for us, because I mean, we're basically a one-person operation. But different, you know, obviously a large publisher, there's a bunch of people, doing it, though not as many people as you would think,
yeah,
especially on the sales end. Yeah.
someone like Jim Lee is able to outsource a lot of his responsibilities to
Right.
to other people, I'm sure.
Right.
Um, can you tell us though what makes Rosarium different from other publishers?
Well, as I said, we focus mainly on brown folks and we publish folks from all around the world. Um, and we just kind of have so let me see here. We've had stuff from like Canada, Mexico, Uganda, Norway, Italy. We just did RUR from the Czech Republic. Um, we had this 2-volume thing of short story called Sunspot Jungle, which was 105 short stories from around the world. So like our whole thing is like introducing the world to itself since 2013. That's our tagline. But
Oh,
I
wow.
think like mainly it's sort of like there are a couple things. One, we don't believe in the notion of diversity. So like there's diversity and there's the world that is, and we want to represent the world that is. And also, like, if you do think about diversity, let's say, it's a completely different notion for us. It's more along the lines of um all kinds of different storytelling. Because it's sort of like when people don't have to check a box, then they're free to do whatever they want. So we're always kind of looking for stories that you wouldn't necessarily see. Um and yeah, and just sort of like a different perspective on that. So we're kind of I would look at it as sort of like a less corporatized way of looking at things, because we're not trying to follow trends, don't really believe in that. Um, and we're looking for idiosyncratic voices. It's sort of like I always tell people, right? Like if there was a time machine, right? And they give me a guitar and they go like, "Hey, we're gonna send you back in time to when you're 5. And from the time you're 5 on, you're gonna learn how to play like Jimi Hendrix." And if I did that, I still would not be able to learn how to play like Jimi Hendrix because there was only one Jimi Hendrix, right? Like there's,
Right.
and there's only one Toni Morrison. You can go on and on and on and on, right? Um, and that's sort of what you're looking for. You're looking for that voice that only that person can do. And a lot with like how corporate culture has become, like you don't see that as much. You don't see like these insanely hard or weird artists who actually used to be mainstream at one point. Like before we were born, like in the 60s, and well, I was born in 70s, so 70, all that stuff. Or you even look back, like, Malcolm X was on the Michael Douglas show. Like it was just like, like it's just like these weird kind of like challenging people and artists and thinkers that were in our pop culture that it's just kind of disappeared. So you're just kind of looking to kind of bring that back a bit.
So when you say you don't believe in diversity, it sounds to me like you're kind of saying like you don't believe in like pigeonholing people based on what their identity is. Do I
No,
have
it's sort of like I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Diversity is a white construct, right? And it's sort of like this artificial setting where you kind of like we kind of don't want people to realize that brown folks are 93% of humanity, right? So it's just like, we're just gonna pick and choose a couple of people here and there and go like, hey, look at us, we're diverse. And you're like, no, you're not, because if you actually were representing the world that is, then I mean, you would only even in this country, even though they're trying to turn it back, brown folks make up almost 50% of the population, but you look, they're only like 11% of published authors.
right?
And then if you go behind the scenes, I don't even know if brown folks make up like 2% of publishing. Like once you
Yeah, I mean that's something that I'm not in that side of publishing myself, but I understand that's the big problem within the publishing industry is that it's overwhelmingly white.
well, I mean, it's not a problem to them. I mean, because like that's a problem that you can easily fix if it were a problem,
Right, right.
you know. So, it's just sort of like instead of just dealing with that, celebrate something else. Like celebrate the world that is. Like you're
Yeah.
not gonna sit up there and like, march somebody out there and go, hey, here's my pet X from X land. Like you just be like, hey, here's a story that we like. Like let's hope you like it too. You know.
Yeah. So what is and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, consortium.
Consortium? Oh,
Consortium.
that's a
Yeah.
yeah, consortium is I mean, I think that's like the British pronunciation consortium, isn't it? I don't know. Um consortium is a distributor. So they are a subsidiary of Ingram, the big beast Ingram. So we signed on to them. But That was like we were internationally distributed before we were with Independent Publishers Group, but we wanted to be with a distributor that had a smaller catalog, so that they can pay a bit more attention to you. And then also, since it's Ingram, like basically any bookstore in the world or library in the world can order our stuff with no problem.
So it gives you kind of more resources on the distribution end of things.
I think it was like more direct because it wasn't like distribution's like a cartel. Like it's not, so everybody's just kind of like parsed out their little territory and they all work together.
Okay.
So if you're in that channel, you basically have it. I just kind of needed something that was a little bit that could spend a little bit more time with us as a publisher. Um yeah, but IPG was the first ones that took us on and they took us on really early.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, so we started in October 2013 and they picked us up probably like a year, yeah, like less than a year later because we had Mothership, which is that right there. We had a Mothership. We had a couple of my older books. We had a reissue of The Jones Men, which is an old 70s crime novel. Um, and we had John Jennings was doing Pitch Black Rainbow, his art book, and stuff like that. So they're just like, wow, for people with like, four friggin' books, you guys are like really distinctive. So
That's awesome. So do you
it
take
was. I mean, it was a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. This side of publishing is a lot. you know.
well, do you take submissions? Like what goes into the decision on what you publish?
Um, I kind of don't. And that's mainly because I'm one person, with two kids. And, sometimes I have a day job, sometimes I don't.
Mhm.
And a wife who is okay with my being a horrible husband. I don't even know. Yeah, probably not horrible, but just kind of like constantly having like all this. Yeah. So my life is triage. So a lot of it just kind of has to do with like it's kind of weird. It's almost like alchemy. Sometimes I'll ask somebody, hey, um, do you want to work together? I mean, but those are people like I've known for a while. Every blue moon I get a submission, but I don't want to discourage it. I really wish that I didn't have to discourage it because you never know what you're missing,
Right.
you know. And I think that that's very important, especially from our end, like because that's what independent publishers are supposed to do, and that's actually what I like. Like I like the fact that like a lot of people that are associated with or like have published are like much bigger now. That's like a really cool thing. Um, but yeah, it's just sort of like, and I'm guilty of it even when I ask, like, if you submit to me, it's gonna take me about a year to get to you, you know.
Yeah, well, before I continue, I just want to acknowledge I'm getting some questions
I did see that.
in the chat right now. I have a list of questions from Ramon that I want to get through first. So I don't want to discourage people from putting questions in the chat. I just want to say I'll get to those at the end. I want to get through Ramon's questions first, though. So again, feel free if you have questions to put them in chat.
Oh,
We'll get to them
I've
after.
got one.
Oh,
Mr. Campbell, are you planning to use artificial intelligence for your comics in the future?
No, not really. No, it's not a thing that really interests me. Um, so
I understand.
yeah, yeah.
well, again, we'll get to audience questions after we get through Ramon's questions. I got a few more questions for Bill first. Um, the next being, what happens after you sign on a creator in terms of editorial, production, marketing, that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I think I pretty much went over that, but it's like you
Yeah.
sign and then we really don't work together for a while, and then when things ramp up, you just kind of have to be ready. So, um, editorial wise, like I generally when it comes to like novels and stuff, I don't really take on things that I would have to develop, because that's yet again another time constraint that I have, which yet again is like another one of those things that you wish you could do, but you just can't. um my stuff is pretty light. Mainly I want to, for the most part, take on finished projects already. um
Yeah.
in fact, that's part of the reason I started doing um foreign comics. Like, so, RUR was from the Czech Republic, so all I had to do was get a translator, who I already knew. And also I speak a little Czech, so that's,
Oh, really?
yeah, I used to live there. Um, and then Silk Cotton, which is funny because it's set in Guyana, and the writer's from Guyana and the artist is from Spain, and we actually got the rights from an Italian publisher. But I'm starting to get, and we were looking at another one, which unfortunately the publisher died while we were talking about
Oh,
it. So,
no.
so it's like, but it's a comic because I was in Angoulême last year, and it's a graphic novel that I absolutely like adore. But yeah, like, yeah. But so on the comic side, I pretty much want like a finished thing because I've just been burned too many times. And
I,
then in that case, it's kind of, I mean, yet again, it's a fairly light process because I'm not I'm not really going to take on something where I'm like, oh, you need to redraw like these like 30 pages, or I want the angle this way and that. Like, that's not really not my thing.
yeah,
Um,
it's definitely a different beast when you're working with something that's pretty much already good to go,
right.
um, versus something that needs more work. Which kind of leads me into my next question. As hard as it can be in this industry, why do it? What keeps you going?
Well, I mean, for me, it was, how can I do something positive in the world? Right?
Right.
Like, what is the effort that I can make as one person that would have like the most effect, no matter how small, on like the world that we live in. And one of the things that a lot of people don't really think about or want to think about is that, politics is like run on narrative, right? So, like, we're literally fighting over this idea of like stories that were made up that we were taught in like elementary school and high school, right? So it's sort of like, George Washington, I'll never tell a lie, blah, 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 blee, blee, blee. Thomas Jefferson was great. We don't talk about how he coerced Sally Hemings, who was like 14 at the time, by like, holding her brother hostage. Like, it's just like, so it's like sort of like you kind of realize that, if you, I always say, like, when I was writing Coontown, like the reason that I wrote it was because my agent at the time told me I wasn't ghetto enough. And at the
Oh,
time when he said that, like less than 30% of black folks lived in majority minority neighborhoods, let alone ghettos. All right. So you're just like, oh, he who controls the narrative holds all the power. So then, like, the only way to counter that, because it's just like, oh yeah, this is something that you're taught that we are, and like it makes you feel better to think that we are. So then it's just sort of like, if you take the reins of narrative, like, you can you can change the way that people think and the way cultures think. And, like when we did Mothership, which is Tales from Afrofuturism and Beyond, that was 2013. Like people didn't know what it was. Um, and you can see, like, clearly not just me, and I just had a small part in it, but you can actually see, like, 12 years later, like what I said was right? Like it's just like, yeah, you can affect the way that society works through controlling narrative. So like that's pretty much it. It's not like everything that we do is political or anything. It's more along the lines of just empowering people to have that say kind of like changes the way that people think about things and the way they roll through the world.
Well, all art. I mean, I'm hardly the first person to say this, but all art is political on some level. You
I
know,
mean, it can't not be, but yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, even humor, right, is based on a lot of cultural assumptions, which are, I mean, it's just a part of it. Um,
right.
yeah.
So you kind of got into this a little bit, but do you have any thoughts on how to make the industry better?
I don't really consider it a concern of mine. I mean, not to be like a jerk or anything. It's just sort of like, yeah, I'm doing what I do. Yeah, I do what I do. And if there are more people like me, the industry will change because it has to, but I'm not going to sit up there and worry about what they think or like how they do their thing because they're going to do whatever they're going to do. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I'd like to think that you know, if we had more plurality, if we had more people kind of approaching these things the way you do, if we had more resources for people to, get these kind of marginalized stories out there, that
Well, I
would.
mean, it's sort of like we treat this whole idea of like, marginalization or something like that's some kind of like mystic force that happens, and I don't even know how the hell that happened. It's done on purpose. So like I'm not gonna sit up there, it's sort of like well, you're too young, but are you familiar with Bonnie Raitt?
I know of her. I have
Okay, so
not
she
listened
has
to
this
that one.
song, I Can't Make You Love Me If You Don't.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that to me is the industry. Like, I'm not gonna sit up there and worry about what they do and sit up there and wring my hands, because as a set, okay, I mean, this is bragging, I guess, but a lot of stuff that I write and a lot of stuff I publish is like taught in universities, right? But but the industry is just like, oh, I don't even know who this guy is, even though they pluck artists and writers from us a bit. So like I can't worry about that. Like who are we trying to prove ourselves to? You know?
Yeah.
You
No,
know, I mean,
I hear you.
I am sympathetic for people who are trying to break into the industry, but I mean, I'm a weird kind of insider outsider, right? So yeah, I have dinner with these folks and hang out with these folks, but I'm not signed by any of them. So
Yeah.
so
And it
so
doesn't sound like you have much of a desire to be either.
nah, not really. I mean, if I want, I mean, not saying it would have worked, but if I'd wanted to be like famous or whatever, like I would have approached this whole thing differently. I definitely wouldn't write something called Coontown Killing Caper. Like I wouldn't, talk about like, I wouldn't, if you ever read it, I mean, it's like my middle finger to the publishing industry. I mean, I literally lost my agent over it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, you know, yeah. So it's not, I mean, my a bigger concern for me is not necessarily making it or whatever, is just like to have my works outlive me.
I
And
see.
then to have what I do, as a publisher or whatever, like
Hi,
that.
I'm Siri. How can I help you?
That's weird. Um,
Sorry, not sure.
I don't even have
Uh,
Siri. Like this is like,
Oh,
um,
let
I'm
me
not sure. I'm not
explain.
sure why that happened.
Sorry to interrupt, but sometimes we do get hackers and internet trolls and stuff like that. Sometimes happen,
Okay,
okay,
well,
though
well, no
not
worries.
rarely.
But
we'll just power through it.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So
uh,
for me, yeah, it's like the work that I do is just sort of. I mean, I was telling an artist, I was just like, you know, when it's all said and done, you're going to be remembered for two things, right? Like how you treat people and the work you leave behind, and everything else is like bullshit and ice cream. So like that's kind of just how like I look at it. Like, you know, I just want what I do to last. And like, and the thing is like I'll never know, right? Because I'll be dead.
Right. But
But you,
I think that's something that's very common for people of any kind of artistic inclination
right.
to want their work to.
And I mean, I do have hints that it will. So, you know, it's cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
Um, do you have a dream project you'd like to work on someday?
Yeah, I guess I do. Like I thought like I really don't, but nah, I do. I do.
Okay. Do you want to just keep that close to your chest for now, or do you
Yeah,
want to talk a
because
little
you
about?
know, I mean, ideas aren't copyrighted. If you have a good idea, keep that to yourself.
Okay, yeah, no, I definitely respect that.
But yes, I want to go back to because I started writing graphic novels because I didn't have time to write novels, right?
Right,
So I do have a dream novel that
a
I would
dream
like to
novel.
figure out how to write.
Okay, so a prose novel then,
Yes.
not a graphic novel. Okay,
No. I mean, there is one that I wrote that is too long. I can't figure out what to do with. Um that I would like to have done. I was back in 2021, I was misdiagnosed with a brain tumor. And like when I got
oh,
that diagnosis, I wrote a 310-page graphic novel in like 20 days in my car because the kids were still home. Like I would like actually that to see the light of day, but I can't even imagine paying an artist for 310 pages.
yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. But yeah, that is one that I would like to get done. And a prose novel.
Cool, cool. And my last question before I turn it over to the audience, do you have any advice for someone who wants to be a publisher?
To be a publisher. Oh. Well, I mean, the pat answer is like, don't do it. But I really think that if you want to be a publisher, I think that the two things that are really important are like a vision, um, and then just sheer determination. And I think that that's true in a lot of things, because the rational thing actually is to quit. Like quitting actually makes a lot of sense, especially when you're looking at something that's a lot of work. You don't really make money doing it, etc. So you have to have a vision and a determination strong enough to like stick it out. And then I think like, and I think that this is probably true of anybody who's in any kind of leadership position. Um, like I have a low-key obsession with Berry Gordy,
Okay.
Motown, for those who don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he was a songwriter, and yet his ego was strong enough that he could hire like like 15 of the top 50 songwriters of the 20th century. Like, you know what I mean? Like he was like, so to me, I'm just like, you can't, if you're gonna do a thing, you can't need to be the best in that way. Like you, like people who just like crap all over everything because their ego is hurt. So like I think like for leadership purposes and which will work for publishing is like, you look for like people who are good or even better than you and you let them fly. Like if you get butt hurt over other people's success, then you shouldn't do it.
Right, right.
And if you need to be like, oh yeah, hail me, then you shouldn't do it.
So
Uh,
don't do it for the ego boost.
nah, I mean, no, your ego needs to be strong enough to do something like this.
Gotcha.
Yeah, or else you'll just ruin it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, well with that, I'm gonna turn it over to the audience. Um I I'm going to read out some questions, but if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to put them in chat. Steven asks, I imagine it's hard for one person to have a great story, writing, and drawing. How would you recommend that people collaborate?
I don't know, like collaborations are really hard. So like you basically, yeah, again, this is yet again a commitment and determination thing, right? So I think like one thing is it's like what I was talking about the ego thing, right? Like your egos have to be strong enough to be able to collaborate. Like one person can't be the boss over the other. Like one person, like like that sort of thing. Like you just can't. Um, and I really think that yeah, you have to find a person that you really respect and who really respects you, and you guys have to have like probably like some sort of shared vision that would make the thing possible. Because if one person's just doing it for a gig, like it probably isn't going to get done, like for the most part, just statistically speaking. And if one person's like, well, I'm this and I'm that, and I'm like, it's just, yeah, I mean, it can work, but it's probably not going to work. So I think mutual respect is like the big thing.
I hear that.
Yeah.
Steven's also looking for a little bit of insider knowledge here. Do you know who takes submissions?
Nah, I don't pay attention to what other people are doing. Sorry. We hang out, but we don't really talk about people. Yeah, we don't really talk about that kind of thing.
Yeah. Michael asks, do you have a set number of books to publish a year, or however is ready to print?
Well, we have to pretty much come out with pretty much have to have a schedule like a year and a half in advance. We I did because of the pandemic and switching distributors, like I had this huge backlog. So from like fall of 2022 to like the end of last year, I think we came out with like 13 books or something like that. And I'm not doing that again. Like that was a lot. But I think like I for a small publisher, the perfect number would be 10 a year. Um, at this capacity, I would probably say six would be like my limit. Like we're not coming out with that many things in 2025 because after coming out with 13 and like as I said, I traveled a lot last year. I just needed a break, which
Gotcha.
actually has never come. Um, but yeah. So there's no set number. I think that if I had my druthers, I would do like 6 to 10 a year.
I see. Okay, yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Well, as I
Uh,
said, because with the distribution thing, because you have to properly like get them into those channels and do all the different things where press is harder and harder these days. I mean, it's like I literally just joined TikTok like yesterday. I posted my first one, and you know, because TikTok hit me up and asked me to join, but you
Oh
know,
wow.
yeah, it was weird. Um, um, but yeah, so there's just like a lot of, yeah, there's just a lot that goes into releasing a book.
I see.
Yeah.
Um, Char asks a very big question. How do you find the motivation to write graphic novels?
Um, at first it was because I when I started Rosarium, it knocked me off of writing, period, for a while. And then, I'm not really doing this for myself, I'm doing this for other people. And then it just kind of like it was starting to wear on me that I was not creating anything. So that's how like Bad Mothers came about, because I was just like, I just needed to do something. Um, a lot of it just has to do with just still wanting to say something creatively. So, Bad Mothers was just sort of like, I just needed to do something creative, right? And they're all female band of space pirates, and that was a James Brown revival band. And then the day the Klan came to town, that just kind of happened. That was a freakish thing, because it's about a Klan riot that happened in my hometown outside of Pittsburgh in 1923.
Oh wow.
And that one actually, oddly enough, coming home from TCAF, because I didn't find out about it. It was a town secret up until we came out with the book. But my brother was just like, "Oh yeah, like we were just talking one day, and Easter, we both were in Pittsburgh to visit my mom, and we were just talking about the hidden history of Pittsburgh." And he was like, "Oh yeah, like the Klan riot in Carnegie," and like my brother actually didn't grow up in Carnegie. I did. And I was like, what are you talking about? So it was weird. Like a couple months later, I was driving back home from TCAF, and I have to stop off at Pittsburgh because it's the midway point. And when I was driving around my hometown, the main character popped into my head. And then that's how that book came about. So then it's just sort of like, oh, I guess I write graphic novels now. But like ideas still come, and then if you're committed enough. And the beautiful thing about like being really busy and having kids and stuff is that it actually kind of narrows down your time.
Mhm.
Um, like I used to think that I was busy, but I wasn't, like compared to what I am now. But like that kind of just hones like what you're doing. So like the day the Klan came to town, I ended up writing that when I had a free moment, and it was basically whatever scene popped into my head was what I wrote, and then I would send it to Bijan, the artist, and then when I had enough like these weird pieces that weren't at all in sync, I took 3 days off of work, and I just like streamlined it into like a cohesive narrative, and that was all just because I didn't have the time.
Oh wow.
And that's kind of like how you do things now. It's just like, yeah, it's like I don't really have time to be doing it. So when I do, like it's really focused. It's really interesting.
So being more busy gives you more focus to actually get the work done.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Because as I said, like everything's triage, right? So you kind of have to do it, and you don't really have I mean, I take breaks, but yeah, you don't really have the time to be like lollygagging, as like I guess my grandparents would have said. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you don't really have time with drafts and all that stuff. So like you're thinking about it, and then you're pretty much I mean, you're pretty much writing what's going to go in there, because you just don't have the time to be, screwing around.
Right.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
don't have like multiple drafts of anything.
Oh wow. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So like what you see is pretty much like one and a half drafts is like what ends up being like the thing.
That's a little bit counter to what a lot of us I think are taught in school about writing. But I think once you're doing it professionally, that's how things end up sometimes.
I mean, I think like there are a lot of like creatives who get a lot of things done and a lot of things that we don't see, and I think that they have to. Like, like you have somebody like a Victor Laval who's like teaching, has a wife and kids, and is still coming out with like graphic novel scripts and novels, and is like attached to a TV show and all that stuff. I'm pretty sure his writing process is insanely efficient.
Yeah.
And he's not the only one. There are a bunch of folks that I can yeah.
Right. Um,
But it's like whatever process works for whatever. Like there's no one way to do anything.
yeah, of course. Everybody has to do it in a way that makes most sense for, how they think, what their lifestyle is, that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah. I mean, my first novel, I cut out 200 pages, like because I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and then I was like, "Whoa, that's a little crazy." Yeah. Um, but that's because I typed it out, and at the time, I typed over 100 words a minute. So basically, whatever came into my head ended up on the page. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
David asks, how do you handle abstract conceptual themes in a graphic novel and keep the visuals interesting?
Um, I don't know if I do. Like, what's an abstract conceptual theme? I don't, I'm. What do you mean by that? Like, I don't. I'm sorry. I guess I'm just not.
I was thinking about when you started into say you're writing like Dune is dealing with time and space and pre-science, all these things that you can't draw that. You can have people standing around having conversations, and then in a comic book or graphic novel, that you need a lot of motion to keep people engaged. So I was just kind of curious about how you would actually go about if you have any thoughts about if you're going to do, or even possible to do, a graphic novel that deals with these kind of those issues that are in your head that are more invisible, but then still keep it engaging for people. Or maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe you could just have people standing around and talking about those things. I mean, even what we're doing now, we're talking about things that are conceptual. They're not. You can't. We're just talking, but you can't. Would we just draw an action scene and have us playing? Like if we were taking what we were talking about now, would we draw the people, fighting or something? I don't know. I just thought you was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
I'm a writer. I mean, I'm not. Jennings had me in an art show last year, but I just only started drawing like again like 2 years ago. So I don't really think of it. But I mean, when I write something, I do have it pictured in my head. So I am a visual thinker. I would say, I don't know. Did you ever see Jonathan Demme's take on Beloved with Oprah
No,
and
no.
Tandy Newton?
Oh gosh, no. I know what you're talking about, but I've never seen it. No.
Yeah, it's not great. However, Toni Morrison's novels are all insular. Like
Mm,
they're all in your head. And like he actually made a movie where everything is in your head.
mm.
You know, so I would approach it that way, but I don't know how abstract my thought is. Like especially now because like all I think about is the next thing I have to do. Uh, but I would think that basically if you have abstract thoughts, like it actually would be pretty easy visually, but you would have to map that out exactly what it is that you would mean. Do you know what I mean? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, it
Yeah,
does.
because I mean there is abstract art. So like there is a way to do it. I mean I wouldn't say like like unless you're like Sienkiewicz or something, like you're not doing that for like Marvel or DC, but if
No,
you
no.
were if you were willing to just like stretch out your imagination, you can just do anything. I mean that's the beauty of comics is that you can do anything.
Yeah,
You just have to figure out how you would represent that. And you have graphic novels where people just talk all the time. You know. And the Czech one that we just did, RUR, it's mostly dialogue because it's
mm,
an adaptation of a play.
mm.
Um, yeah.
Well, we have one last question in the chat, and this just due to timing might have to be our last question of the night, depending on how much time we spend answering it. But Michael wants to know your thoughts on digital publishing and distribution.
You mean like web comics or like actually coming out with just like PDFs and doing that stuff?
Michael, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure. Whichever. I mean, it's such a wide situation, and
Yeah,
because
I mean, okay, so I mean, if you're talking about like making money or whatever money that you can make,
well, maybe let's just do like getting them out there first.
yeah, the thing that we found, like just in publishing, because I have talked to publishers about it, um, but this could change at any given moment, right? Like we just noticed, like who saw the last 4 weeks coming? Well, I mean, anyway, I digress. What we mostly found is like digital sales have to have, for the most part, for us as publishers, have to have like a physical component. Like it's the physical presence of a book or whatever that drives people to buy it digitally. And then, but this is like on our end of things. Like I'm sure that there are other people who have done this and done this well. Um, but that's pretty much been the case for us, is that, you know, just trying to sell like a single issue digitally, just we tried it in the past and it just didn't work. Because like when we were doing more works in progress and they would be single issues, like we would do the single issues digitally and then compile the trade. But like the sales on just the digital only things were just really not there. But you know, maybe it was like a fault on our part. Like maybe there's a way to do it and we just couldn't find it. You know. Does that make sense?
Sure. I mean, somehow, I mean it because digital to a certain degree, because the decline of comic book stores across the country, and especially more rural or certain parts of suburbia, they just don't exist out there.
Yeah, this is true. um yeah, yeah, that it's interesting because like just digital sales like plateaued at some point, you know.
Is that because of things like what's it called? Uh, well, there's Marvel Unlimited. I don't know how well that's doing.
I In all honesty, I really just think that reading is like, it's sort of like shopping, like it's a tactile sensation, right? Like it's just like there is something like you can't curl up to a screen like you can curl up to a book. Like you don't have the same relationship with it. For me personally, my brain doesn't really do well reading on the screen. So like I like don't read digitally. Like even when people submit, like I print out like a whole manuscript. So like for me, it's like a cognitive thing. But yeah, I think that, just like people love online shopping, but for so many people, there's something about like the hunter gatherer, right? Like I want to go to the store and find the deal, or I really like getting out of the house. And I think like there's something to like curling up to a book that I think that readers really like. And it's like a very intimate experience that you just don't really get digitally for most people. So, when they first started coming out, like, digital things boomed and then it just kind of plateaued, because people just like books.
I mean, I got that. I've been buying audiobooks to save some time and space in my apartment.
Yeah, I totally understand that too.
Granted, it's an audiobook versus something like a
I
graphic novel. You need to see pages.
yeah, that's true. I mean, even though there are like audiobook versions of comics, I spent like 18 years helping to produce audiobooks for the blind for a Library of Congress, so I kind of like don't like audiobooks so much anymore. But yeah, I totally dig how people like those. Like those are like, yeah, they still seem to be doing well. But I would say you just kind of need to have like for the most part, you probably just need a physical copy to go along with the digital because people just like physical.
Well, they love collectibles. Every
Yeah,
like
yeah, just
people will
just
spend money on the Blu-ray with all the special editions if they actually like the movie or show.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we have since this is gonna be the last one, I'll just do a quick plug. We're doing Lion Man. Did you see that before? So if anybody's familiar with Lion Man, he was in All Negro Comics, was like a one shot in 1947. It was like the first comic anthology that was done by an all black creative team, which once the printer found out about that was like, we're not selling this book because it was 1947. But Lion Man is like one of the first black superheroes. So and it's public domain. So John Jennings, if you're familiar with him, he's won 2 Eisners, New York Times bestseller. Damian Duffy, who's also an Eisner. David Brame is the artist who was nominated for After the Rain for an Eisner, and then me and a young Zimbabwean writer named Yvette Lisa Ndlovu. We're coming out with that. We're messing around with public domain characters and just remixing them because those old stories aren't really too kind to us. So we're just kind of messing around with that whole thing. So we're coming out with a trade paperback in the spring. We have a whole section of like 20 artists doing public domain pinups. So you got like Nate Powell and Joel Christian Gill, Ben Passmore, a bunch of other folks. So anyway, it's on BackerKit now, like the teaser page, because the campaign is starting on the 25th. So if you look up The Adventures of Lion Man on BackerKit, please check it out.
Well,
Okay.
with that plug, I think we're
I
gonna.
had to do it.
No, no, no. I'm glad you did. I would have, if you did, I would have asked you to do it anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, uh, is there anything else you'd like to plug before we start wrapping things up?
No, as I said, it just started on TikTok, which is Rosarium Publishing. You have like literally a video. Then I did like a little video for this thing. So like, but we're gonna really try to like get into that. Like we're just kind of like the whole, and it has a lot to do with like Motown and culture, like how Motown built a subculture around itself. And I was thinking like, I really like that idea, like for a publisher to do. So that's what we're gonna like mess around with TikTok on that. So you can follow us there. But the big one right now is the Lion Man on BackerKit because they're trying to, because the trade's only like $15 a pop, and we're trying to raise 10 grand. So it's gonna be a tough
Well,
one.
I think the Motown of comics is as good an elevator pitch as any. Uh,
Well, yeah, I mean, I just think that because the thing that I find so interesting about Motown is because they were so good and they did have a vision. 60 years later, like like they're in a lot of ways like incredibly culturally dominant still.
oh, totally.
In ways that like you don't hear like the Beatles, Rolling Stones, all those folks like you do like, but you can go into all kinds of spaces and hear Motown now 60 years later. And I think a lot of it has to do with not just how great the music was, but like that whole like, I mean, it was integrationist and aspirational blackness, but at the same time it was a very strong thing that they did, and that it lasts even to like you hear Motown in spaces that you didn't hear even when that stuff was first coming out, you know.
Right.
So I'm like, yeah, the whole idea of trying to be like a Motown of indie publishing just kind of intrigues me. Like trying to build a culture around what you do.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. Do you have any like socials or anything you'd like to share?
Uh, well, I got off of Twitter. Uh, And I
Same.
haven't messed with Blue Sky yet. So there's the Facebook page, you know, you can look up Rosarium. As I said, now the TikTok thing, Instagram is Rosarium Pub or Rosarium underscore Bill. Um, and yeah, I guess that's about it for now. I mean, I still haven't gotten on Blue Sky yet, or you know, there's only so much one person can do. I do a lot.
Okay. Well, I'm not because I'm in grad school right now while working full time. I'm not doing as much public writing as I used to, but again, my I'm not Ramon Gill. I'm Gregory Paul Silber. That's Silber with a B, not a V. If anyone wants to find me online, the best place to find me, as far as social media goes, these days is on Blue Sky. I'm, I think, Greg Silber at bsky.social or something like that. I don't know. Just search for Greg Silber or Gregory Paul Silber. You'll find me. Um, and if you Google Gregory Paul Silber, you could find a lot of my writing. Not to be confused with Greg Silber, the marine biologist, which is why I encourage folks to search Gregory Paul Silber to distinguish me from him. And yeah, thank you all for coming. Could we all give Bill a digital round of applause?
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Greg, for filling in. You did a great job. And thanks
I
everybody for
appreciate it.
coming. I hope I wasn't too boring.
No. You were great. I really appreciate your time. I am going to stop the recording now.
All right. Remember, back your kit line, man.
Well,
What?
I said,
goodbye. See
yeah,
you soon.
yeah. Have a good one.
All right. See you, everybody. Have a great